Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Maze NTG here, back with another daily deck video. Today we've got something a little bit special for you. Tomorrow, Friday, June the 21st, the War of the Spark Chronicles Part 5 Gideon's Sacrifice event goes live on MTG Arena, and what we thought we'd do over the next 24 hours is we're bringing you 4 different decks for that format, each with a deck tech and a bit of gameplay, just to give you some ideas or some inspiration before you tackle the format yourself tomorrow. So, what's special about the format for the Gideon Sacrifice event? Well, the cards in your Arena Standard deck can only contain cards from 3 expansions. So Guilds of Ravnica, Ravnica Allegiance, and War of the Spark. And before you decide to build a Gates deck, Gates Ablaze is banned. So we have 3 sets to build our decks from, and this first deck meets that requirement. This deck is Rakdos Aristocrats. So very similar to a deck Jeff Hoogland's been playing in Standard recently, with minimal tweaks this deck is legal for the Ravnica constructed format. So, what's it all about? Well, the deck's designed primarily as an aggressive deck with sacrifice synergies designed to get early damage in, and then close the game out with reach with repeated damage triggers and other effects that gain value by sacrificing your creatures. So what are the deck's kind of engines? What are the sacrifice synergies? So we have 4 copies of Priest of Forgotten Gods. By tapping her and sacrificing 2 other creatures, you can have any number of target players each lose 2 life, so usually just your opponent, and sacrifice a creature. You also get 2 black mana and draw a card. So this is a good enabler, it's a sacrifice outlet, you get to sacrifice 2 creatures, and the effect comes with added value of your opponent sacrificing a creature and you drawing a card as well. 3 copies of Judith the Scourge Diva. While Judith isn't a sacrifice outlet, whenever a non-token creature you control does die, she deals 1 damage to any target, so she's kind of a sacrifice payoff. And in addition, she fits the aggressive slant of the deck because she gives other creatures you control +1/+0, and with effects like Judith on the battlefield, you don't care about trading off your small creatures, especially when there's something like Gutterbones which can come back from the graveyard. We also have 4 copies of Mayhem Devil, giving us an effect similar to Judith. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. So this is also triggering off things like your opponent having to sacrifice a creature to Priest of Forgotten Gods ability as well. So don't forget, it's not just looking for you sacrificing a permanent, it's also looking at your opponent sacrificing them as well. We need small creatures to make this deck work. 4 Footlight Fiend. So Footlight Fiend again has a ping trigger, in this case when Footlight Fiend dies. So if you sacrifice it to a Priest of Forgotten Gods, if it does trade in combat, if you sacrifice it to, we'll see the deck plays Heartfire and God-Eternal Bontu as well, you get additional damage out of that, as well as just being an early creature to fuel Priest of Forgotten Gods. We have 4 copies of Gutterbones. It comes into play tapped, and if you can get an opponent to lose life, which is pretty easy in this deck, you can also spend mana to return it from your graveyard to hand, giving you kind of an engine there where you can use Gutterbones to fuel your sacrifice effects to get in for damage, use it with impunity knowing that you'll be able to get it back. Finally, because this deck doesn't have access to Fanatical Firebrand in the format, to round out our 1-drop slot we're trying 2 copies of Dreadmalkin. Worst case, it's a 1/1 for 1 with Menace. Best case, it's kind of a slower sacrifice outlet that can get out of hand on its own. We're playing some 2-drop creatures aside from Priest of Forgotten Gods, so we have Dreadhorde Butcher, which is halfway between a Footlight Fiend and a Snowball that can just roll your opponent over. So it's a 1/1 with haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, because it was printed in War of the Spark, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, it doesn't just deal 1 damage to any target, it deals damage equal to its power. So if it's been going for a while, being able to sacrifice a Dreadhorde Butcher can give you that reach you need to close out a game. Otherwise, we're playing 4 copies of Rix Maadi Reveler, so it's a 2/2 for 2. Normally when it enters the battlefield, you can just discard a card and draw a card, so as we're an aggressive deck, it's useful to be able to turn lands in the late game into spells. However, if you have dealt damage this turn, again, trivially easy with this deck, you can pay its spectacle cost of 2 black-red instead, in which case you discard your hand, which ideally will have no cards in, and draw 3 cards refueling you. We also have 3 copies of Tibalt, Rakish Instigator, stops your opponents gaining life, makes more devils that are functionally Footlight Fiends, does everything the deck really wants, gives you kind of 2 bodies for 1 creature, and if Tibalt does stay on the battlefield on 1 loyalty, that static ability can really matter. We also have 2 copies of Heartfire, so we have plenty of incidental creatures and planeswalkers to sacrifice to it, many of which will contribute at least 1 extra point of damage via a trigger, so you're normally looking at 5-6 points of reach from a single Heartfire. So once your opponent's life total is low enough, you can definitely threaten them with our Heartfires in the deck. Finally, our ultimate curve topper, because we are still playing 23 lands, God-Eternal Bontu. So a 5-6 with Menace, when it comes into play, you can sacrifice any number of other permanents to draw that many cards, and as we've said already, we've got Mayhem Devils, we've got Judith's. Sacrificing your lands will trigger Mayhem Devil, so that's quite a large amount of damage you can just throw at your opponent as soon as God-Eternal Bontu enters the battlefield, and if they do somehow survive, your hand will still be full, and the majority of the deck only costs 1 or 2 mana to operate. As we said, 23 lands, so 10 swamps, 9 mountains, 4 blood crypts. Consider playing some Rakdos guild gates, but we have enough 1-drops, and we only have the double black on God-Eternal Bontu, that I think this mana-based configuration is fine. So, what do you think about the deck? Do you like its chances in the Ravnica constructed format? Are there any improvements or tweaks you'd make before taking the deck into the event? If so, please let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, what we're going to do now is we're going to take this deck into the arena standard queue, just play a game with it to see how it kind of plays out. Our opponent won't be using a Ravnica constructed deck, but the event doesn't go live till tomorrow, and I want to be able to get this information out there in advance of the event. So I will see you in a moment. Okay, so we've got an opponent with Rakdos Aristocrats. Like I said, the opponent's just going to be playing a normal standard deck. However, I think this hand is pretty keepable, and we'll see if we can keep up. We've got 2 lands, we've got 2 1-drops and a Butcher, we've got Priest and God-Eternal Bontu if we flood out. So opponent's playing Watery Grave, so technically their plays are Ravnica constructed legals so far. I think we're just going to make a Gutterbones here. It's got 1 more power, and if opponents control, we'd like to start doing as much damage as possible. Next turn, I think we're just going to, depending on what happens, deploy Priest or Butcher. So opponent just passes. We'll go to I think we're going to play Priest of Forgotten Gods this turn. Because if opponent's on something like Dimir mid-range and they play a Thief of Sanity next turn, I want to be able to activate Priest. It might just get cast down end of turn, to be honest. Oh, Tyrant Scorn, sure. But that's fine. Next turn, we can just run Butcher, and if we don't draw land, opponent just has a Narset. So we can kill Narset. Let's see what Narset hits. Moment of Craving. That's a pretty good one. So what are we doing? I don't really want our Dreadhorde Butcher to die to this Moment of Craving, particularly. Especially as it has haste. I'd much rather just run out Gutterbones, Fiend. And if opponent has a sweeper, that's unfortunate. But we can't really play around that. With this hand, at least. And I mean, we can always get some Gutterbones back later on as well. Cry of the Carnarium would be pretty brutal and does exist in Ravnica Constructed as a format. As does Ritual of Soot, but at least in that case we get 2 Footlight Fiend triggers and our Gutterbones wouldn't be exiled. The opponent is passing through. So now we have to decide if we just want to jam the Dreadhorde Butcher knowing it's going to get Moment of Craving. And I think the answer is we don't. Do we? It's still like 2 damage. Odds are the opponent Moment of Craving is a Gutterbones, and then we just get to return Gutterbones and play Gutterbones. We'll see what happens. We'll send all at face for now. We could send 1 after Narset, actually, because we may want to play God-Eternal Bontu next turn. Actually, no, this is fine. This is fine, because if opponent does Moment of Craving a Footlight Fiend, we'll just use the trigger to kill Narset. And if opponent Moment of Craving is a Gutterbones, we get Gutterbones back. So we can play Dreadhorde Butcher next turn. And we'd need to draw exactly black to play. We only have a single swamp. We're still going to get Gutterbones back, though. And then we'll pass. So opponent is at 16. So opponent has a replacement Narset. They kept the right one, unfortunately. So let's see. Opponent whiffs on the Narset, and we do draw a swamp. So our options here are interesting. Our options here are interesting. I don't think we play Bontu. As much as I'd like to, I don't think we play Bontu till we draw something like a Mayhem Devil. What I think we do is play Butcher. We'll play Gutterbones. We'll go to combat. Because we do have Bontu, I think we attack like this and just clear the Narset. Yeah, I think that's fine. And put opponent to 14. Butcher grows. So we now have 4 points of damage as long as opponent doesn't have Cry of the Carnarium. Oh, opponent was just color screwed Esper. Okay. So opponent won't have Ritual of Soot. This is okay then. What do we draw? Judith was an excellent draw there. We'll play Judith. This could just be lethal. What is it? 3, 6, 9. Okay, we're 1 damage off. So whenever a non-token creature you control dies. So if our board dies, we have 6 creatures dying. We have Dreadhorde Butcher damage. I think we can safely kill Teferi with some of this damage and then just go face with the rest. Because Butcher will be a 3/3. Yeah, this is beyond fine. Maybe opponent has Moment of Craving for Judith, in which case this is awkward. Tyrant Scorn. Okay. So what's happening here? We have 3 damage going at Teferi, so Teferi can just draw a card. I guess we still send 1 face. So now Teferi can't tuck Dreadhorde Butcher. If our opponent does play land Kaya's Wrath, they still are taking 5 between Butcher and 2 Fiend triggers. So opponent's under quite a lot of pressure here. And if opponent takes damage next turn and is tapped out, we can just Bontu to force the triggers as well. Yeah, so we get there. Opponent is overwhelmed by the Aristocrats. So, victory for the deck. Not a bad first showing. So, seems like a reasonable choice for the Ravnica Constructed event. At least I'd personally think so. Again, let me know what you think of the deck in the comments if you have anything to add. If you enjoyed this video, you'd like to see the others we're going to be releasing over the next 24 hours, please consider subscribing and turning notifications on. If you'd like to see us play games with this deck or any of the other decks we're going to be having a look at live, there is a link in the description below to our channel, twitch.tv/MazeMTG, where we'll be playing the decks once the event does start. Otherwise, wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you all very soon.